everyone who knew you was talking about like this was a well-kept secret. This was like very good job.
It was a secret identity.
You had a secret identity.
I was living for like 2.5, 3 years, almost without being able to talk about it.
Did you have that moment like as you're doing it, like the dichotomy of like what's good for Peter Parker and what's good for Spider-Man?
Yeah. Except Peter Parker is worried that if he lets people know that he's Spider-Man, that Aunt May could be at risk. All of that.
Right.
Whereas for me, I was like, they're just gonna fire me. If I tell anybody, I'll get fired.
So like tell me about the call that you got to be Spider-Man.
Well, it was a process.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the very beginning, in a way, was because I had worked with Insomniac before
On Sunset Overdrive,
on Sunset Overdrive, and some little stuff before. They were pitching themselves to do, like, they were pitching with probably a bunch of other studios to do the Spider-Man game, and John Paquette and Jeremy had like, they're like, oh, we've worked with Yuri, we think he'd be good for a test, and it was me and another guy, and we tested a scene. With Spidey and Norman Osborn, we recorded it as a test, and they're like, this is just, we don't even know if we're gonna get the gig, and so I'm like, great, I at least got to do that, and then they came back later, and I don't know all of the details, but I think they ended up getting the gig, and then they ended up trying to cast it, and it didn't quite work out. And some of my friends over at Insomniac were like, we really think Yuri might be good for this. He did the test, and they're like, yeah, but he did Sunset Overdrive. The character's very different. They're like, okay, here, let me explain acting to you.
Yeah.
Here's
I was gonna say, show them Ben 10 and then show them Evil Within.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And but it actually worked against me that I had worked with them before, in a way.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it took a lot of people who believed in me, and I'll never be able to thank them enough for that. To keep saying, look, we think this might be our guy. So it was a process, because I think there was initially some pushback, but I'll never be able to thank them enough for believing in me and trusting me with this. And then it obviously had to go through different levels, because this is a big property for them. And almost 4 years in from that very first test that they did, I still can't believe that it's true.
So Spider-Man is one of these characters that we've had so many different portrayals of. We've had 3 in movies, 4 in animated series, however many video games have had different voices. Yeah. Were there any that you were looking at as inspiration? Were there any that Insomniac wanted to get close to, or did they want to stay away from all the previous ones? Or what was it like?
We didn't have a discussion about, hey, we're trying to model it after this one, or we're trying to stay away from this one. I think I'm subconsciously influenced by all of the Spider-Man I have seen before, and all the comics that I've read, and the movies that I've seen, and the games, and the cartoons. So I tried not to worry about it too much. Insomniac was definitely, they're like, look, people have seen a lot of Spider-Man in their lives and recently, but there's still a lot to tell there, and there's still so many stories to tell. We want this to be our Spider-Man. They definitely were concerned. Brian Intihar, the creative director over there who's overseeing this game, is the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world. So I always knew that we were safe, because I haven't read Spider-Man recently. But I didn't have to worry about it, because everybody on the team, there's so much love for this character and for this world that I was never worried that if I didn't know enough, or if I didn't have enough of a strong idea, that they weren't there to catch me or to push me in the right direction. There was plenty of pressure to get it right, because I grew up with this character, and I grew up reading comics, and he's Spider-Man.
Right.
But I tried not to worry about that too much, because as soon as I got in my head about that, I just would have lost it.
Well, and it sounds like you were able to get into the character very well, because Brian and Bill were talking about the fact that you would improv a lot of lines, and a lot of what's in there is you.
They are very generous, because I gotta call out Christus Gage and Ben Arfman and John Paquette, who are sort of the lead writers on this. I mean, we had Dan Slott do some early story stuff as well. So like, I mean, the Spider-Man DNA is in there, and Marvel was very present for the whole process. On one hand, they said, we're hiring you guys because you do something really well, and we want to let you do it. But it's still Spider-Man and it's still Marvel, and they weighed in, which was important. But yeah, I think in part because I had worked with them before, John in particular, that I felt comfortable saying, hey, we'd do a couple of takes as written, and then maybe I would do something else. Or I was, moved by working with the other actors on the mocap stage, doing performance capture.
Yeah.
And once I felt comfortable with that, they were okay with that. It was game on. I mean, most of what you hear in the game was just brilliant writing. But every now and then I'd be like, that's not quite right. Or I would come up with some sort of ridiculous idea and try it, because they can always burn it.
Right.
But I bet a few made it in there. It
So
fun.
you mentioned the mocap and working with the other actors.
Mm-hmm.
Normally with VO work, and I'm sure you're used to this, that
Yeah.
you're not in the same space with other performers. Tell me about how that world is changing.
Yeah, I come from a theater background, and it's interesting to see it come full circle. When I first got into VO, it was, you were always in the booth. I mean, that was just the deal. And then especially with games, all of a sudden, PCAP started to take off, and it was, especially with Uncharted, and then everybody wanted to do it. And it's complicated, and not all voice actors are comfortable acting physically, and not all physical actors are comfortable in front of a microphone. But when you find actors who, a lot of us are from the theater, a lot of us are from film and TV, and it's sort of come full circle. Like, I was in theater, and then voiceover, and now I'm like, I get to do theater again. And there is something that you get when you're acting with other actors that you don't get behind the mic. If you're a good voice actor, you can definitely make it sound like you're talking to someone else, even if they're not there. But man, there's a beautiful chaos that happens when you're reacting off of something that you couldn't have gotten in the booth. Because it's something that somebody else did.
It seems like it's a huge hurdle for an actor to have to jump that we never get to see.
Yeah.
The fact that you had to do it.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane this time around, because she's not a model anymore. She is now a reporter for the Daily Bugle.
Yeah.
Does that step on Peter Parker's toes a little bit, or like how does their dynamic change?
They're in a weird place, because I think when the game starts out, they've been broken up for a while, and so you get to sort of learn, a little bit about what led to. You get to re-engage with them as they're trying to figure out what they mean to each other, and yeah, her being a reporter and him not. I mean, the nice thing about Peter Parker in this story is that he's a scientist, like almost above anything. You look at Peter Parker and you're like, what if he didn't get the powers? Where would he be? He'd probably be a scientist. He'd probably be a lab tech. He'd probably be, making things. And that's part of the conflict that comes into this, sort of 8 years down the line when he's been Spider-Man for a while. But he hasn't given up on science. He's not, and the point at which he is, I think, in this, and part of the struggle, is he realizes that with the science that he's doing and with the things that he's learning and with the projects he's developing, he could potentially save a lot more people than by being Spider-Man. So he's confronted with this, what's more important to me, and what is actually the best thing for me to do? Maybe Spider-Man isn't the best path for me. So it's a really interesting, and that was one of the things that when we were talking about it early on, I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's, getting into, the fun thing about Spider-Man has always been, Peter Parker's world and Spider-Man's world, and the worlds colliding.
Yeah.
And, because I think we're all Peter Parker, to a certain extent. I know I was as a kid.
And especially in a world that has, other heroes,
right.
It gets harder and harder to justify being Spider-Man when, Captain America and Tony Stark are next door.
Right, exactly. And, we've seen a lot of that in the movies. Like, there are tiers, and then, Spider-Man fights these kind of guys, and then, the Avengers save the world. So do they need Spider-Man? And, this might be a thing that Peter's thinking about. Are my energies better spent? Because he's always been super smart. And sometimes that is, it's always there, but, sometimes the responsibility and the heroism are played up. And it's, what if he could save so many more people by, making medicines, coming up with cures and technology to prolong life and to save lives? That's an interesting question. And it's one of the things that really, allowed me to sink my teeth into the part.
So Bill and Brian told me a little bit about the fact
Those guys.
I saw the opening cinematic in Hall H. Definitely a different tone than I would have expected from an opening cinematic. I thought it was going to be big spectacle and all that. And it's this panning around Peter Parker's apartment. And they mentioned the Back to the Future influence of that.
Yes.
And they had, on the mocap stage, they were trying something with you that didn't end up making it in the edit.
Did they? I'm trying to. We've done so much stuff.
It was
the wake up.
The waking up. Yeah.
I was sad to see that was gone. Because they were like, okay, here's the deal. It's Marty McFly. It's very Back to the Future. It's the beginning of. We want to. They're huge fans of that, and they had me in exactly the same position as Michael J. Fox, and the wake up. The awkward, weird wake up, and we
kind of like one arm in the overalls. That
was exactly. And I was sad because I basically saw the opening cinematic when you guys saw it yesterday for the first time, and there was a little part of me that was, which I'm sure I'll do throughout the game. I'll be like, but we did this cool thing, and you got to let those go.
Yeah.
But they're all these fun little. Everybody on the team is they're huge nerds, and we would work these little things in there. There's as much as they've, I think they've done a great job of over this last year and recently showing a lot of new stuff. But you guys have no idea that you've seen nothing. It's great. It's great.
Oh, I'm so excited to see so much more. We saw a lot of, story being told in that opening cinematic, and you mentioned that the game picks up 8 years into being Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But we still see the paper from the memorial service of Ben Parker.
Right.
We still see the designs for the webbing. So is Peter Parker has grown in that 8 years, but at the same time is kind of clinging on to what started him as Spider-Man.
Yeah, and he's still, while it's a different Peter, it's still you've got to establish the Peter that we all love. Even if, somebody said this to me. I think Brian said this to me today. He's like, this may be the first time some of these people are introduced to Spider-Man, and I'm like, oh, that's too much pressure. But that's also really weird because I grew up. I have so much because I'm old. That I've had so much history with the character, and I've seen so many movies and played so many games and read so many comics. You can't. They didn't want to deal. They didn't want to do an origin story again, which I think is a bold move and a smart move. We've seen it a lot, but I think they still wanted to interject those elements in there. So don't worry, he's still the same Spider-Man, but we're going to tell a different story. And for the people who have. It's even saying this sounds ridiculous for people who don't know Spider-Man,
right?
That there are some little anchors, for them to grab onto. But I love the, visual storytelling. I think is hugely important. I think we exposit, too much in movies and so on. And when you get to see something like that just in a couple of minutes gives you all you need to know to start the thing, I think they did a great job.
So I want to ask a little bit of an inside baseball VO question real quick. I know that you have done games before where you have to do, sounds for like punches and, like just breaths and exhales and things like that. But when it comes to the physicality of someone like Spider-Man, but then also at the same time, the superpowers of Spider-Man and, having the high endurance and something like that. Is that something that you consider going in to record that kind of stuff?
Yes, 1,000%. And it is something we worked on as a team because, you're right. You want to be able to show effort with through the voice and through the sounds, but he's also Spider-Man, so he's like super strong. So how much do you show? And there was we definitely walked the line. We wanted enough so you can feel those punches, you can feel the kicks and the lands and the flipping and all that. But they had to bring me back a lot. They're like, he's Spider-Man. Another element that sort of came up that I don't think was considered from the get-go was with this, being able to free roam around and to go on the story path and to do the missions or just diverge. They didn't always know whether Spider-Man would be walking, or running down the street, or swinging. So all of a sudden we had to record 2 different versions for a lot of the stuff. Is he swinging? Is he walking? Walking is going to be a lot less effort. And we really had to noodle the swinging because in the beginning when I was doing the swinging lines, there was a lot of effort in there because everybody wanted you to be able to feel the movement of... But sometimes I was...
So they just put you on a bungee cord and you went past the microphone.
Right. I would... when I'm doing recording, hopefully they rolled on some of it. But, when I'm just standing there or walking, there's the version that I would normally deliver at the mic. And then when I'm swinging, I would do this with my arms behind the mic, just like this. And just to give that sense of, you can... Even if it's not hard for him, he's moving. And I hope that it doesn't come off as too grunty or too movie because he's Spider-Man.
You mentioned in the panel that there were 2 other performers that were doing all the Spidey parts of being Spider-Man in the mocap. Mm-hmm. What is it like, leading up in the mocap to the point where someone else is going to take over?
It was like a dance. Most of it was Ross, and then Seth came in and did some stuff too because. You can't always make schedules work, and they're both these amazing physical, acrobatic martial arts guys. And it was like a dance for some of it because we would do a scene, an acting scene, and then I would turn and go to jump out the window, and I would get on my, on one foot, and then I would stop, and then Ross would come in, and we'd do this, he'd do the scene from, picking up from that little bit. And he'd be like, okay, wait, what foot did you start on? I was always on my left foot. Okay, great. So, and then he would do, this amazing, flip out the window. And they make me look so good. I mean, it is amazing. I can't give them enough credit for, they are half the Spider-Man, all the cool stuff is them.
Are you picking up on any of the stuff that they do? Like, are they sitting there saying like, "Hey, don't start on your left foot, start on your right because I need this kind of thing"? We would discuss it before. We'd go over it before, and then sometimes, and this is a credit to Insomniac, they would have me there even if Ross say would do the whole scene, because there was so much physical stuff, but there was dialogue in it. I was standing close to Ross, delivering the dialogue. And so it was weird because I had sometimes the face rig on, mm-hmm. the camera, so they wanted to get my face as if I was doing all this stuff. So I had to sort of be in Ross's head so that when you saw my face, it wasn't it connected with the physical stuff. They're piecing together the perfect Spider-Man.
Right, exactly. They're building the perfect Spider-Man out of several people, and it was often we had to remind whoever I was acting with. They're like, I know you're going to hear Yuri's voice. You're going to want to turn to him, but he's not where Spider-Man... You got to look at Ross. Look at Ross. And so, sometimes Nicole, I think, was talking about that yesterday. She's like, I had to remember to look at Ross for, some of that stuff. It was. I've never had to work that way before. It was super fun.
So, obviously, this is a dream role. It'd be a dream role for anyone, and you are a Spider-Man fan. As a voice actor, you've run the gambit from playing, teenagers to
mm-hmm.
Gruff action heroes and all that. Is there still something out there that you really want to sink your teeth into?
Cool characters like this. Because I love these worlds, because I'm a huge fan of genre films and comic books, and there's still so many characters that I would get a kick out of playing, both on the Marvel and DC sides. And every time I get to do one of those, it's like a little check box, like a nerdy little check off my list. I could go on forever. Or, historical figures that I love, or I mean, that's the exciting part is I don't think I'll ever get bored. I don't think I'll ever run out of characters that I want to play. But as long as they keep writing them as well as they've written this, it'll be fine.
Well, I'm definitely excited to see just how well this is written, because from the little I've heard, it sounds amazing. It sounds like Spider-Man. You sound like Spider-Man. The writing sounds like Spider-Man. The game looks like, it looks like Spider-Man. And September 7th is when we're going to see it, and I'm going to be playing it on a new fancy red PS4 Pro, hopefully.
I'm glad they announced it finally yesterday. I'm like, now I can pre-order it. And it's gonna be one of those things where you're just gonna be happy to just swing around the city, and then everything else is frosting. I mean,
right?
It'd be worth it just to swing around New York, because they've got a lot of they've modeled it really well. It looks like New York, but it looks like Marvel's New York. There are all these really cool little Easter eggs in there you can swing by, and you're like, wait, that's Yeah, it's great.
I love the little detail of being able to land on the ground and take selfies with people. And
high five people on the street. Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be fun. Yuri, thank you so much for joining us on Collider Games. We'll definitely be checking out the game as much as possible before the release. And I'm going to be playing it just nonstop. I'm going to, just stop working and just play
that. Joe, thank you for giving us an excuse to hang out again, because it's
absolutely
been a long time since I've seen you. I miss you. I don't miss Roca, but I miss you.
No, not Roca.
Oh, is he still here?